Small Changes by Digits 27, Chapter 2, New Friends. Naruto almost couldn't believe that he was doing this. He was sitting on a tree branch that overlooked a small clearing, silently staring. Uncle was tumbling down the tree or blasting herself off it, chips of bark flying as she careened into the dirt below. Naruto remembered his own training to do just this a few months ago with his mother and dropped from the branch into a crouch before standing up and walking over. "You're still putting too much chakra into it," he droned. Hanko just huffed from her position, lying on the floor. From here she could look straight up into Naruto's long face. She once again noted that his voice held no condensation or arrogance. He was just stating a fact. It was a little infuriating because it meant she couldn't criticize him, although that didn't stop her from trying. Her cheeks puffed. "What's your point?" she grumbled. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but his eyes showed no amusement at the statement. The purple-haired girl, who just couldn't understand him, glared, his stony tone bothering her. Naruto sighed again as he looked down between her and the tree. The way his father taught him wasn't going to work here. He offered her out a hand, and to his surprise, Uncle took it. Still out of breath from all her previous attempts, he pulled her up, the girl standing with a grunt. There was a brief pause as Naruto dwelled on his thoughts. "Lie down next to the tree," he instructed. Uncle looked at him quizzically, wondering why he had suddenly changed his method of teaching. "Finally admitting you were wrong," she glared. Naruto just gazed at her emotionlessly, making the girl take half a step back, her own palms rising up in placation. "No, it's just people learn differently. It's obvious that the way my father taught me isn't going to work for you." Uncle's lips came firmly together, slurring into a frown at that. She climbed begrudgingly, lying down with her feet against the trunk. "Now what?" Naruto just motioned to the tree, staring at her with a slank expression. "Now apply an even layer of chakra to the soles of your feet and begin to take small steps upwards. If you feel yourself slipping, just adjust your control and try again." Uncle nodded as her tongue suddenly emerged from her mouth. Naruto had noticed she did that whenever she was concentrating really hard. It was certainly different than her attitude in class. Hanko began to slowly walk up the tree, using her hands to support herself on the ground until she felt confident enough to let go. She felt her grip loosening and quickly applied more chakra, only to have put too much in, forcing her to brace her hands to stand on. In a second, though, she got the right mix and held it as best she could. A small smile spread over her features as she hesitantly took her hands off the ground. "Hey, Fish Cake, I'm doing it!" Naruto twitched at the nickname, but stayed quiet all the same, watching her as she slowly took one step, then another. He could see she was visibly straining her core muscles in order to stay horizontal, but was additionally training and generally growing. Growth would fix that. "So, speaking of your dad, don't you have to get back home or something?" Uncle blinked when she didn't get a reply. Looking around, she saw that Naruto had vanished. "Hey, Naruto, oof!" She suddenly lost her grip on the tree and fell a good 3 feet to land squarely on her back with a small gasp. She got up unsteadily with a groan and looked around the clearing. Sure enough, Naruto had gone. The girl just blinked as she glanced around, now suddenly alone in the training ground. "Something I said?" The next day, Naruto was one of the first into class again. He sat down in the same spot again and quietly waited for the rest of the students to arrive. This time, though, he had a small scroll laid out in his desk, and every so often he would make a note of something. He continued to get strange looks from his young classmates, at least the ones who bothered to look his way anyway. To anyone else, it simply looked like he was doing homework, even though they hadn't been assigned any. He also noticed he wasn't the only one wrapped up in an individual study. The same black-haired, pale-faced boy he had noticed yesterday was calmly reading through a scroll at the same desk. Naruto ignored him for now, just like he did everything else, except until Anko burst into the room barely on time for class. It was hard not to pay attention to her. Somehow she managed to look even more tired and disheveled than yesterday. She was wearing the exact same shirt. He was positive of that. She hadn't actually changed clothes since yesterday. Familiar grass stains all over the back of it. Granted, he was wearing the same tracksuit as before, or at least of the same style. It turned out his father had a lot of them in his wardrobe. He shut his eyes for a moment. Going through his parents' room had brought up a lot of memories for him. He had broken down, crying for all of last night. For the first time since their deaths, the griping visions vividly haunting his visions. He felt refreshed today, though a lot better than he had before. He supposed he just needed to let out some emotions he didn't even know he had kept bottled up. He opened his eyes only to see Uncle sitting next to him again, grinning happily as she struck her tongue out at him. I did it! Naruto raised an eyebrow while at the same time taking in Uncle's appearance again. Disclosed, he could in fact confirm she had not changed her clothes since yesterday. She stunk of the tree and damp earth. Did what? Uncle just blinked at him before sticking her tongue out childishly. The action was so unbefitting of someone wanting to become a shinobi that Naruto nearly smiled at it. I walked up the tree, she declared. Naruto just nodded slowly as he turned back to face the slightly flustered teacher that had just entered the class. So you'll be eating with me again, then? Uncle just nodded with a shit-eating grin that clearly told him she would. It caused him to sigh, yet at the same time he couldn't fight the tingle in his cheeks. His self-imposed isolation had already begun to get old, and he was warmed, yearning for the company. As strange as Uncle was, it wasn't unpleasant to be with her. Of course, fish cake sensei, she murmured with a grudging smile. Naruto blinked at that but didn't turn, not allowing Uncle to see the hint of a smile that quirked up his lips. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The redhead listened to what the teacher said, while occasionally making notes of his own in his scroll. Uncle, she proceeded to piss off their teacher as much as physically possible, starting up a cruel game of dodge the eraser. The rest of the class, save a select few, seemed to find her antics just irritating, teacher included. One girl on one of the front benches laughed every time Uncle would dodge the soft, chalk-stained projectile, which earned her a few harsh glares from the teacher at encouraging the purple menace behavior. Naruto took a moment to look at her long brunette hair that flowed down her back like a wave, pale skin, and two red triangular markings on her cheeks that marked her as an Inuzaka. Minato, as Hokage, found it very important that Naruto be knowledgeable about all of the major clans in Konoha. It was important he didn't embarrass himself in social situations, not that it mattered in the end. Other than that, the morning passed on without a problem. Like clockwork, as soon as they were dismissed, he vanished from the room in a barely visible blur of red. When Anko chased him outside, she saw him scaling the side of the building, almost taking lazy steps to walk up without problem. Tentatively, she placed her feet on the wall, remembering everything the redhead had taught her yesterday, as she slowly but surely scooted her way up the academy wall. A few kids stopped to watch her with amazement, but she ignored them, focusing on the charcoal wall flowing to her feet, keeping it even as she made her way up. Finally, she was able to walk over the edge of the roof where a quiet Naruto was calmly eating from his bento. She was a little irritated that he didn't even mention the fact she had successfully walked up the wall. Like it didn't matter, she sat down next to him in a huff, not even bothering to strike up a conversation as she just continued to eat. Naruto looked around, wondering why Uncle hadn't started pestering him for something yet. He noticed she didn't have any lunch in front of her, thinking she probably forgot it in her haste. He offered up his open bento to her. Uncle just stared down at the offering for a moment, blinking in surprise at the kind action that had no apparent prompt to her. Why? Naruto gazed at her with inquisitive purple eyes. He was just doing what he thought was right. His mother had always stressed the importance of equality, while his father had always imposed the importance of working together. I have food and you don't. It just seems like the right thing to do. Uncle stared at him a moment longer before picking up one of the rice balls. She raised it to her lips before pausing, before she bit in. Naruto just looked at her with the smallest of smirks. What? It's not poisoned or anything. Uncle frowned a bit onto the rice ball, smiling as she enjoyed its home-cooked taste. She finished it quickly, much to Naruto's mutual shock and mild amusement, before licking her fingers clean. Thanks for that, she mumbled. Naruto just nodded as he returned to his own meal. No problem. The roof quickly returned to some semblance of silence. Why are you being nice to me when all I do is bug you? Naruto looked around. They had managed to stay quiet for almost 5 minutes before Uncle finally spoke up again. What do you mean? Like I said, it's just what I think. The uncle looked at him sternly and looked unbecoming. His red brows raised nervously in confusion at her. I mean, why do you even let me hang out with you? Why bother training me? I'm sure you had family to go home to yesterday. Wouldn't they be worried if you stayed out just because of me? Naruto went very quiet as he turned away from Uncle, staring out over at the kids, talking and playing or or eating lunch down at the ground. My parents died in the QB attack. Uncle went quiet as well, her mouth opening and closing rapidly without really knowing what to say. Her limbs fumbled. I'm sorry, but Naruto raised a hand, waving off her apology quickly. Don't bother. It gets really sickening after a while, having everybody's pity. He trailed off. You didn't know, so don't worry about it. He chuckled a relatively humorous laugh, but it was better than anything else he had managed in the last few days. If he had been looking at himself, then he would have been amazed that he could even manage a laugh at this point. I don't know. Having you around just makes it less lonely, I guess. He laughed dryly as he turned, his hand rubbing the back of his head as he offered the first genuine smile Uncle had seen so far, even if it was only small. I guess that sounds pretty sad, huh? Uncle quickly shook her head, not wanting to upset Naruto any more than she already might have. He laughed again as he settled back on the roof, looking up at the sky with clearer eyes than he had for a while. He felt a tiny bit of that weight that settled over his chest lighten as he looked up. You managed to fill a silence pretty well. Uncle smiled at that until she got the hidden message and promptly punched Naruto in the arm. "Ow!" he said it fairly flatly, not having actually felt the punch compared to what his mother would dish out when he got especially cheeky. Uncle just smiled, that sickly sweet smile she could do, the one that looked innocent enough but was clearly a sign of her growing irritation. Naruto laughed it off, suddenly something he could do with relative ease again. "Thanks for that." Uncle turned looking at the redhead curiously with a cocked brow. "For punching you?" Naruto nodded with the barest hint of a smile as he turned his gaze to the ground. "Yeah, people have been treating me like glass ever since Kasan and Tao-san died. I'm sick of it. At least you don't tiptoe around everything like I might break or something." He turned, his smile growing ever so slightly. "It's refreshing." Uncle nodded stiffly, looking down at her hands in thought, maintaining a neutral quirk in her lips, which Naruto didn't seem to mind at all. "Anytime." Naruto chuckled emptily again as he straightened up, feeling a lot better, at least until he caught somebody on the periphery of his senses. "It's rude to eavesdrop on people, you know." Uncle just looked around curiously, wondering who Naruto was talking to. It was answered when a tall, black-haired boy dropped down behind them, gazing at them almost as disappointingly as Naruto. "Apologies, I didn't mean to intrude on anything." Naruto turned, noting that it was the same boy he kept noticing in the classroom, probably Uchiha by his sharp eyes and an even sharper hair. "Hey, it's a free roof." The boy just smirked briefly as he sat down on the opposite side of Naruto and Uncle. "So it is, you're Naruto Namikaze, correct?" Naruto just nodded, continuing to pick at his bento without much enthusiasm. "My mother asked me to look out for you." He reached behind himself and pulled out a sharp plastic container with a luncheon, holding it out in front of him. "Apparently, she and your mother were friends. She asked me to give you this, but it appears you already have a lunch." He blinked suddenly as the food disappeared from his hands. "I'll take that then, thank you." He blinked again, looking around at Uncle, who now happily began to eat away at the free food before chuckling himself. "Your friend is quite forward." Naruto smiled across at the black-haired boy. "Tell me about it." That earned him an elbow in the ribs as Uncle continued to happily tuck into the food. The new boy just stuck out his hand, which Naruto quickly took, never one to be rude thanks to both his parents' lessons. "Itachi Uchiha." Naruto smiled and nodded as they shook. "I thought as much." Itachi just nodded as he began to eat his own food, making Naruto curious as to why he wasn't eating with his own friends. He shrugged it off though as Itachi leant back, this time with attention to Uncle. I saw you scale the building. Quite impressive. Who taught you how to do that? Uncle grinned cheekily as she wrapped an arm around Naruto's shoulder, an action he didn't mind in the slightest, smirking. Fish cake sensei, of course. The nickname, on the other hand, he could live without. He blanched. Itachi just smirked amusingly at the pair, chuckling at himself as he ate the rest of his meal quickly. I should have expected as much from a Namikaze, or an Uzumaki for that matter. Naruto smirked wide in a challenging way. The boy raised himself to his feet. Uncle, on the other hand, just seemed confused as she looked between the two. Am I missing something? What's so special about the name Namikaze? Itachi's slight expression morphed into one of disbelief. His brows raised high, wondering thoughts lingering on how she didn't know, seemed to know the most obvious things. Then again, the Uchiha had always impressed the most important of knowledge everyone who they deemed mattered in the village. Well, for one, they were a founding clan of the village, and secondly, it was the family name of our last fourth Hokage. Uncle quickly spat out the rest of her mouthful over the edge of the building in surprise, unknowingly covering the teacher below them in half-chewed rice. You're the Hokage's son. She pointed a finger at Naruto as she blinked in shock. Naruto, on the other hand, just sighed as he gently brushed her almost accusingly hand to one side. Was the Hokage's son. He's dead, remember? His tone was a bit icier than usual, and Uncle noticed, remembering back to when he had talked about people treating him differently. She chuckled sheepishly as she playfully punched him on the arm. Yeah, well, I could still beat you down. Both Naruto and Itachi shared a look in surprise at the sudden turnaround, but Naruto quickly smiled, a small sigh of relief passing through his mind. The three of them stayed up on the roof until their lunch break finally ended, quickly being herded in with the rest of the students. Naruto took his seat in class. He wasn't too surprised when Anko snagged a seat beside him. He did pause dramatically when Itachi took the other adjacent seat. He blinked in mild surprise, wondering when he started attracting people with like a magnet. Class dragged on for another hour until the teacher finally stood up, smiling for once. Right, we're going to go out into the training field and have a brief spar just to get an idea of where you're all at. And that way we know what you need improving on or we need to focus on more. We'll have sessions like these once a month until you're full taijutsu lessons come into play next year. Of course, any students who have personal taijutsu styles from family or clans, oh, and self-taught styles too, are fully welcome to use those styles to study or practice. One kid on the second row put up his hand a little angrily. Hey, how is that fair that they get special taijutsu styles and the rest of us just get the academy taught ones? The teacher raised an eyebrow at this, clearly irritated by the question. There is a reason we teach this style of taijutsu at the academy. It is flexible. Many of the jonin you will see out in the village use the very style we teach here, tweaked of course to better suit their skills. However, if you must know one of the most powerful and highly trained praised taijutsu styles to come out of the Konoha, the Goken was created by a student no older than yourself, self-taught from scrolls in the library. You are more than welcome to try and replicate the feat if you are so inclined. The students quickly sat back down, now a little embarrassed as evidenced by his red face. All right, now if we all will come outside. All the students in the class suddenly braced for the sudden gust of wind they were expecting as Naruto exited the class. However, all looked around in bated breath as he to see him sitting still with his arms crossed over his chest. What? Everyone blinked simultaneously, some sharing a laugh. It was an amusing sight when they were all staring at the same boy. Naruto just followed along quietly as the class filed out of the building into the small training ground at the back of the academy. He sat on the farther side of the bleachers, barely paying attention as various kids were called up to spar against one another. Most of the time it was pitiful at best. Kids that didn't know the difference between throwing a punch and flailing an arm. Naruto, finally, he watched with some curiosity as Uncle finally called up the fight against the brown-haired girl he had observed earlier. They took their stances, and Naruto noted that Uncle's form actually looked half decent, even if the other girl seemed more honed, most likely due to the fact it had been tested out through countless battles with members of the Inuzaka clan.
Uncle offered up a cheeky smirk as she leaned back slightly on one foot, putting all her weight backwards. Naruto frowned. He narrowed his eyes at the strange and risky tactic, wondering what it would accomplish. He got his answer as Hana shot forward, typical of their style. She rushed in without really thinking about the consequences. Her speed was impressive, especially for a fresh academy student, but even so, Uncle seemed prepared. At what looked like the last possible moment, she managed to pivot on her back foot, swinging out of the way of the sloppy frontal assault. She quickly capitalized on her opponent, underestimating her as she carried through with her momentum, completing her spine by bringing her elbow down on the Inuzaka's back. The girl was instantly floored, crumbling onto the floor with a jolted groan, but she quickly recovered. Rolling forward, she gracefully curled back up onto her feet with a determined look. Naruto was surprised by the seemingly uncoordinated yet efficient strategy that Uncle achieved. Maybe she had been a bit quick when he was so easily dismissing her hollow jib at beating him. They continued in this strange manner for a minute or two. The girl would launch fast but sloppy frontal attacks on Anko, who would counter without ever moving her weighted foot. Finally, the Unozaka seemed to twig what her opponent was doing, and in a surprising display of tactics, she readjusted her attacks, suddenly spinning to one side as she ran forward. She launched the leg forward past her crafty opponent, intent on sweeping out Uncle's legs with the battle cry. The purple-haired girl just smirked as she used her other leg to swing up, using the momentum to carry through, flipping her body around and delivering a harsh but effective axe kick to the other girl's face. The Unuzaka went spinning out of the small ring the teacher had set up, dazed while Uncle casually strode out. The teacher failed to hide their slack-jawed, shifty-eyed gaze at one another. It was damn near unheard of for a civilian to defeat a clan heir in pure taijutsu, especially this early on in the academy. Naruto just found himself smiling as Uncle strode over, plopping herself down next to him with a look that said, "Beat that." They had to wait another few matches, some more interesting than others, before Itachi's name was called up, followed by a civilian trainee. It was barely worth being called a fight. The boy just rushed the more stoic Uchiha, hoping to get in a lucky hit early on. Itachi simply waited for him to get close, diverted his barely coordinated punch away, and delivered a quick but brutal open palm strike into the boy's chest. Needless to say, the boy was sent flying out of the ring while Itachi walked back over to the stands to sit next to Naruto and Anko. Many of the teachers were a little disappointed, hoping to see a proper Uchiha fight. Many now looking out for any decent candidates for Itachi to spar with next time. A few more fights later, and Naruto was finally called up, apparently the last spar of the day. Surprisingly, his opponent was another Uchiha, a boy with short and unruly black hair called Shisui. The boy entered the ring, settling back into their desired taijutsu stances, which made many of the teachers widen their eyes. A few of them blinked at Naruto, instantly recognizing his father's personal style, built around the Namikaze's legendary speed. Shisui just settled into the typical Uchiha interceptor stance as Naruto cocked his head to one side. You know, that style is much more effective with the Sharingan, Naruto stated critically. Shisui offered a small smile in return, not rising to the jib. I have to make do until it surfaces. Until then, it has proven effective enough. Naruto just nodded with a small shrug as neither opponent moved. The inevitable problem arising when two taijutsu styles built around counterattacks met. Naruto decided to get things moving, considering the only disadvantage he had with his style was that his body wasn't at its peak speed yet. He moved forward, pressing off his dominant leg as he flashed across the small arena in a blur of red. Many of the students and even some of the teachers were left speechless from the display of speed. Naruto quickly unleashed a small but effective sweep, blowing to Shishui's left side, hoping that it was the boy's weaker side. He was wrong though, and even without his Sharingan, the inherent reflexes honed by training allowed the Uchiha to divert the blow from his body before counterattacking with a higher punch aimed at Naruto's head. The Namikaze couldn't bite back a smile, finally allowing his style to come into its own. The whole concept of the Taijutsu style was to be faster than your opponent, allowing you to first predict their attack, much like the Interceptor style. However, unlike the Uchiha's patented style, his did not work by diverting attacks followed by counter-attacking. Instead, the idea was to attack while your opponent was still attacking, strangely more of an interception than its Sharingan brilliant counterpart. He demonstrated this quickly as he moved his body out of the way of Shishui's precisely aimed but too slow punch. He quickly brought his own arm up, landing three successive blows around the boy's arm at the wrist, elbow, and shoulder consecutively. While Shishui was caught off guard by the attack, he swung around, delivering a powerful kick faster than most could follow to the boy's chest. He was sent skating back, but not quite out of the arena, as a small smile appeared on the Uchiha's face. Impressive? Naruto just nodded politely. His opponent's style was also nothing to laugh at, even if it wasn't complete. If he was any other slower, the fight would be swinging, and the other way for sure, and there would be nothing he could do about it. Deciding to finish it quickly, as nothing to be upstaged by Uncle, he rushed forward, dissolving into a blur of red, span mid-stride, looking as though he was going to deliver a spinning kick, Shishui's chest again, only to suddenly drop down into his back, spinning on the ground until he thrusted backwards, catching the Uchiha in the chin. Shishui was finally sent flying out of the arena, not injured very badly, but that wasn't the point of the exercise, so Naruto didn't have to do any more. If the students watching weren't startled before, then they were now. Even a few of the teachers were quieted by the performance. Most were writing off Naruto as a genin already, easily, if his other skills matched his incredible taijutsu. That wasn't to say they weren't also impressed with Shishui, but without really seeing more of him fighting, they couldn't be sure of his skill level. Naruto walked over and offered a hand to the dark-haired boy, who smirked and took the offered hand, letting the redhead pull him to his feet. They were done for the day, so the teacher just let them leave, and Naruto was about to go home when the hand caught his shoulder. He spun only to see the smiling face of Shisui staring at him kindly. Hey, you want to train sometime? It's so hard to find a good sparring partner when everybody you train with has the same style. Naruto paused for a moment in surprise. He had never really been excited to do anything before. Sure, I guess. Shisui just smiled in response, and he waved goodbye to Naruto and walked off. Alright, I'll meet you at the Uchiha compound tomorrow night then. Naruto just nodded lamely as Shisui ran off, Itachi in tow as they both headed back to their homes. Naruto noticed the grounds had pretty much been vacated except for Anko, who stood off to one side smirking at him deviously. What? Naruto gawked. Anko just shrugged innocently, her face turning into a mask of barely hidden amusement. Nothing. Just noticing for somebody so cold you seem to be attracting a lot of friends. Naruto chuckled. She wasn't the only one who had been noticing. It seemed the more he wanted to be left alone, the more people seemed to flock to him. I'm not that cold, am I? Anko just chuckled as she moved closer, mischief glimmering in her eyes. Of course not. Anyway, that's what's on tonight's agenda, Fish Cake Sensei, she whispered conspiratively. Naruto grimaced at the still irritating nickname before his own curious look graced his features. And who do you say needs training? I saw you fight that Unuzaka. You obviously been training by someone. Uncle raised an eyebrow at the implication as she crossed her arm over her currently non-existent chest. And what if it's all self-taught? There was a chuckle from Naruto, genuinely this time. Then I think I should be the one asking for training. Anko just snorted, her harsh attitude melting as quickly as it had formed as she uncrossed her arms again. As if you have all those fancy family moves. Naruto just shrugged, neither agreeing nor disagreeing completely as he began to walk off in the direction of his home. Oh, are you going home already? Naruto turned with a slightly bemused expression. Yeah, why? Aren't you? Uncle seemed nervous about something, even if she was trying to hide it well. Her hands were fidgeting behind her as she looked away from him. Oh, sure. She made to turn to leave, and Naruto grimaced, getting the idea that she didn't really want to go home at all. He fought with it for a moment as Uncle continued to walk away, far too slowly to be at all eager about where she was going. Hey, Uncle, do you want to go and get something to eat or something? Uncle spun on a heel, obvious surprise on her face as she looked at Naruto, taking in his slightly concerned expression. Okay. She quickly hurried back over, but for a good measure punched him in the arm slightly. If you insist. I mean, geez. Naruto chuckled, but it didn't stop his eyes from furrowing into a frown as he led Anko away from the academy. She would talk about inane things as they walked, but even so, he still caught the signs of nervousness that slowly eased the more they talked. End of chapter 2.